Hi everyone, welcome to this tutorial. To give you an overview of what this tutorial will be about is we're going to create a very fake kind of social media advert for a chocolate product. If you recall, in the previous version we discussed how we would bring in or create an asset and author the USD variants, the material variants, and just basically block out something to get going. So once the network's in place, it's quite a nice thing to just kind of maybe create a recipe and drop down the basic template, and you can always kind of pick up the bits and add bits in that you need. So we have this asset, and I have actually published the asset with the third option of open, but it's not actually being used. So let's kind of look at using this asset now in layout and how I would do this. So layout can mean different things in different companies. I'm just gonna use the layout word, the department, like previous layout. I'm just gonna set my USD structure for the project, and I'm gonna bring in my cameras and my basic geometry and just position it, and that's pretty much it. I'm gonna just set some basic camera animation, and I'm just going to use that as a base to kind of get a starting point. So right at the top here, if you look at the left, I'm creating this primitive and I'm writing in a basic structure like so. I'm not sure if that should have a double slash there. So I'm going to set a frame range and a project start and end. Now this could be a potentially problem because we were in assets before and we had this on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this and just set this to be 1001 because that's pretty much the length of my advert. And I'm going to undo this, and the start frame, again, I'm going to just hard code this in at 995. So that's pretty much that. And I think this should be okay. And I'm going to put this to 995 for this one. So you got like a bit of pre-roll happening. Then I'm going to set some generic, some global render settings. So I've got this resolution here, and this is basically my starting point. I'm going to add a camera, and all I'm going to do in the camera is set up exactly what I need, and I'm going to explain one, and then the rest is pretty much a copy of that. So I'm going to bring in a camera, and it's usually one of those things that you need to have some assets in as well. So this thing grows very quickly as you start adding assets. So I would just bring in a camera and I wouldn't even position it. And then I usually create a next form and a parent constraint. So I can basically look through the camera, put the grid on, and start to animate something. So I'm going to talk about these controllers. They're just a place to save something later. And I'm going to look at the render settings as well and talk about the render settings for this camera. So, and I'll talk about all of this. This is kind of like stuff we didn't usually have to deal with, and you might not have to deal with it, to be honest, depending on who you're working with and how big your project is and things like that. But back in the days before USD, like a camera, maybe a locator or something, you didn't have to worry about saving out different cameras. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more to see if I understand it and to see if it's worth doing. So what I'm going to do is quickly show you this node. And this is the edit context option set to time based. And I can set up 3 entries to represent each camera, to represent each shot. And I can declare like an edit. Now this is in professional pipeline. This is probably done a little bit differently, but I wanted to keep this kind of quite loose at the beginning of the project. So I've decided to set a pre-roll and set a frame range for shot 1, and it's going to export this variable called edit, and they're all going to export this variable called edit, and we're going to use that to switch between values. So the option value is set. It's going to control this. It's going to output a edit, which I'm going to use up here for middle click. It's going to return a value. And that's because this will switch if it finds this value. So in the switch node, when you plug things in by default, it'll name these, but you can input these and just call them the shot you want. So now it's going to change this value. So when we get to this frame and we look at the render settings, you'll see shot 10. As we move through, you'll see shot 20, and you can see the wire becoming harder there. So all I'm doing is I'm taking this frame and pasting here and then just adding a +1. So it switches from camera shot 10 to shot 20, and then I give it another range. And then I do the same. I copy and paste this in here and I add 1. So all it's doing is flitting between the cameras. Now if you publish this camera like so, and I publish this to disk, what will happen is you will get, and this will be the loaded cameras here, you'll get 3 cameras, 3 USD files, and that's because I've got this layer save path here linking to this location. So all this is doing is linking to a directory, which is, if I go back to my very top folder into shots, and it's going to link and it's going to publish a camera into each shot. So it's going to have camera layout. So I can kind of save a version of each camera with all the information for the camera like so. And that's a USD-A, but I think you would normally save this as a USD file to be a bit more efficient, or USDC if it's got animation on it. So that's going to publish that. So that's pretty much what happens, but it will also publish a master file here, which I use. So you can see this master file here is going to take all these different layers that we're creating here and create a master camera file that I can just reference in. So essentially it's going to just bring in a reference to all my individual shots. So if I was to bring this in, you can see I've still got my cameras, but you do lose the animation of the edit, which I couldn't figure out how to do. So for the most part, that was mainly there just in case anybody wanted to load an individual camera in. But I thought I'll just stay with this for now, and I will keep this live. So I kind of have 3 cameras set up where I have the option to publish a master camera here at any point. Everybody can pick up all these cameras and all this animation, or they can pick up individual cameras as well. And that means you've got version control as well over the way the camera is saved. But for now, this switch node is going to switch, and it's going to keep it live. So if I keep on the render settings, it's going to switch based on this shot edit control, this edit context option. So that's quite interesting. So that's quite nice, because I can now just kind of define a quick edit based on whatever someone's told me, my own storyboards, my own tests. In this case, it's a very loose, very fake commercial, which I didn't spend very long on. So I thought, right, what do I need? I need chocolate egg. So I brought my egg in once. There it is. That's the thing we published over in the assets department. And there's no transformations on it. And I'm going to define my closed variant and just rename this asset to egg closed. Then I'm going to do the same again, bring it in, and I'm just going to put it like this. It's just going to bring it in. Nowhere useful. It's just floating there in some USD world. And then I'm going to bring in the background. So, you know, I have a closed and an unbroken egg. So you'll have both eggs in the viewport just sat there. You can see. And what you're looking at now is the proxy geometry in the viewport. So it's quite light. Whoops, like that. And that's because of this guy. So if you went to final render, you'd have 2 pieces of geometry layered on top of each other. It'd be difficult to define one against the other without hiding the visibility. So if I hide the broken one, you can see got this thing underneath. That's closed and that's unbroken. So anyway, switching both back on. So we're bringing in something. It's just like, how do I bring some assets in? So I'll do a layer break here because I would like to position my assets. And this is, I actually don't need to position them. I'm just going to have them at the world center. And I'm going to create a backdrop, which is essentially just a grid and a material on there. Just merge that in as my kind of assets that I want to start playing with. And I'm going to graft those in to this structure. So if you remember, we've got this kind of structure here, like so. And I'm just going to add them in like that. And then I can save these out to disk, and that can be referenced back in. So I'll have this saved layout like so, which again is optional, but I have chosen to save my layout in here. So you'll see the layout I've got, my USD. You can see all the information we need for that. And then I can make a choice whether I want to have this like read in the cached data from here, or whether I want it to be live. So I'm going to go for a cached version because I don't think I need this to be moved or animated anymore. So if I was positioning my cameras, for example, if I go to the render settings and I view right down to the output of the layout and I go back to wireframe, and actually let's change that back to a preview so you get the proxy. I'm hitting W there like so. You'll now see that this is kind of roughly how I did it. So I kind of kept my output here, and then I just started to animate my cameras and play around with the edit options. So I could kind of say, yeah, I want the egg to be this far, and then I want the camera to be this way. Now something looks a bit odd here, like the camera resolution seems to be different to what I seem to remember it being. So okay, so I think this was the wrong way around. This was like it was like this rather than the opposite, because I'm doing like a social media thing. So I'd want to go 720 and well 1280, and that's kind of defined up here. So each camera now comes in, and as we switch through each camera and we look at the render settings, we kind of get each camera. If we look down here, sorry, we get each camera kind of updating like so, and I should be able to publish that update to my cameras. And yeah, if I switch this back now, you'll notice we don't get this kind of animated stuff, which is a shame, but you do still get a choice of looking at each camera. So for me, it'd be more beneficial to find a better way, but I'm going to switch this to 1 and leave it on camera settings. So I've got a live connection between animating my cameras. So if I move down now to the placed assets that I put in, and I look down here, the assets are not being touched now. So I can kind of press play and you can see the proxy and the eggs doing its thing. So the eggs are not switching. There's still 2 eggs in the viewport, and that's fine for now. I'll just let animation handle the visibility. I could do it here and whatever, but I'm doing the animation, aren't I, in the next stage? So so in terms of like animating cameras, I created this X form and I created some attributes on here, which was basically the idea behind it was to totally overcomplicate something that was simple. No, I basically created this rotation that kind of allows me to start a rotation and start and stop a rotation and create a speed. And the reason I did that is I wanted the cameras to kind of rotate around the object and all be the same. So I did that here and here like so, and then I was able to scale the parameter here and it would like zoom in a little bit, and each camera could have a different lens. So I was just experimenting with linking a rotation. So essentially what you get is this kind of constant spinning. So it's always kind of like spinning in the same way. So again, you can animate your cameras however you like. This camera 20 here, I can actually go into the range for camera 20, and I don't really like its position, so I could maneuver that around and change it a little bit, or do what I like. In the transform, maybe I just didn't like its position. So you're only changing the camera. So you can do what you like in here with the camera, and you have these 3 separate places to do everything you want. You can copy and paste cameras and link things back and forth, so you could have the same movement on this camera. So if you watch camera 20 now, it will like have the same like animation, so to speak, because the camera's been animated. Well, it's got the same kind of look at constraint, but you can also animate, oops, you can also animate a camera's attributes as well if you really wanted to. So you can get quite creative with this and do what you need to do. You can see I've changed lenses a little bit every now and again, and so I didn't really have any reference or anything, so I just made something super quick up, and I dropped in one network, got this kind of working, and then copied and pasted it, and just defined the camera with the $OS, and everything else is kind of done like that as well. So the point constraint is, it's kind of referencing what it needs to reference. Explain. So this is referencing the camera primitive path. It's just referencing that up there. So I'm just copy and pasting that into that, and then the target is just saying give me this input here. Same for that. I have got some reference from here to here, which I can't quite remember why. It should be some reason, but I can't quite remember. I'm sure it's fine. It's just the point of this is just to show you that you can kind of create multi-cameras right at the top, and then place your assets in and kind of block out some basic stuff. So I wouldn't even consider animating anything at this stage. We just kind of put some basic stuff in, and then we'll jump into animation in the next one. And just to preview this, I could show you the animation by adding in the animation layer, and maybe I want to come back after the animation's done and do something with that. So you can see on a certain frame it switches, and that will switch the visibility of our asset. You see here, so before and after, it switches the visibility, so you get this kind of egg breaking effect. So if I space G, if I select one of these and space G, and I can scrub back and forth on the keyboard, and I can see the animation that I've done here as well. So the layout is pretty much probably the simplest thing, and I keep this like pretty much this section live all the way through the project. And I can imagine if you've got a lot of cameras, it could get pretty messy, but most of the time I'm only doing 2 or 3 cameras, and I might do a project where I have a lot of cameras. I might have to rethink this, but this felt like it was working for me. I'm not saying it's the best way to work, but I can now position an asset, and I've got something in place that can be sent out to all the other departments. We can just reference this layout here. Alternatively, we can just load in now. We could load in the published cameras like we've done here, and we could load in the layout as well and just have them assembled in like a nice sub-layered stack here of nodes. But you would lose this animated kind of render settings, which is driven by this shot edit control, which is actually the edit context option set to a time-based thing. So, and that was quite interesting because I do actually have to rebuild this little setup in lighting later on just to kind of get the same switching just for my own reference. But we'll talk about that, and we'll bounce back and forth between this layout and lighting in a little bit. But before that, we need to drop off in animation and then effects, because we've not done any CFX. So that was pretty much the layout, I think. So you can see it again. I could time travel forward and put in the effects, and there we go. So you can kind of see that as well. So they're quite nice, these sublayers. for just like adding in data, and you see the hierarchy is not changing at all. It's literally just, I've managed to kind of get everything just to kind of layer in using the correct opinions and making sure that everything's kind of going where it should be going. And we're going to talk about all this next, because this is the bit that can be quite tricky when you're animating and you're doing a previs or layout. You want to sometimes tweak your cameras and stuff. So we'll discuss that, and I'll show you how I kind of came up with a workflow for kind of placing assets in multi-shot workflow with animation and stuff, and how I saved out that animation in the next video.